Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are joining us today. My name is Farnaz Kadem. I'm Stanford's Vice President for University Communications, and it is my absolutely great pleasure to welcome you to the press conference this morning in honor of Stanford's newest Nobel laureate, Professor Guido Imbens. This morning, Professor Imbens received the call that he was one of 3 scholars awarded the Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel. He, along with Professor Joshua Angrist of MIT, was awarded half of this prize for, quote, methodological contributions to the analysis of causal relationships. Today, we have with us Mark Tessier-Levine, President of Stanford, Jonathan Levin, Dean of the Graduate School of Business, Deborah Satz, Dean of the School of Humanities and Sciences, and of course, our laureate, Guido Imbens. Before we get to your questions, we will start with a few remarks from our speakers. For members of the media in our audience, if you have not already done so, please submit your questions now. We will get to as many of them as we can, and a recording of this discussion will also be available at the conclusion of the conference. So now I'd like to ask President Tessier-Levine to make some comments. Mark.
Well, good morning, and thank you for joining us as we congratulate Guido Imbens on his remarkable achievement in economics. All of us at Stanford are incredibly proud of Professor Imbens, and we're delighted that his accomplishments have been recognized by the Nobel Committee. Guido Imbens has provided important insights into how to derive causal inferences from natural experiments, observational studies of situations that arise in real life. With his fellow laureates, Joshua Angrist and David Card, he's shown how such real-world experiments can lead to precise conclusions and answer important questions for society, like the effect of new government regulations on broader economic outcomes. The real-world impact has been profound and far-reaching. Professor Imbens has worked with policymakers to design and evaluate economic policy interventions in areas such as education and labor. His methodology has also been implemented beyond the field of economics and is used by researchers in the social sciences broadly. As we seek solutions to our society's great challenges, from economic and educational inequality to the disparate impacts of climate change, Professor Imbens' framework offers researchers an important tool to understand the effects of interventions. Professor Imbens will describe his work in fuller detail in a few moments. This win follows in a great tradition. Guido Imbens is in good company. He's the 20th living Nobel laureate among Stanford's community of scholars. There have been 35 Nobel laureates at Stanford in total over the years. He shares this distinction alongside fellow Stanford economist Bob Wilson and economist Paul Milgram, who were awarded last year's Nobel Prize in Economics for their insights into auction theory. So thank you again for joining us this morning to congratulate Professor Imbens for his remarkable scholarship. I'm inspired by his work, and we're all deeply grateful for his contributions. And now I'll turn it back over to Farnaz. Farnaz?
Thank you, Mark. I would like to now ask Dean Levin to make some comments. John.
Thank you, Farnaz. So it's my great honor on behalf of the Graduate School of Business at Stanford to congratulate Guido Imbens on this memorable and incredibly exciting day of being recognized with the Nobel Prize in Economics. And we just couldn't be more proud of Guido and the work that he's done and the impact that he's had on the field of economics and beyond. And I think echoing President Tessier-Levine, I think it's fair to say that the work that Guido and his colleagues have done has helped to ignite nothing short of an empirical revolution in the social sciences that is fueled both by the methods they developed and the ever increasing amounts of data that we have access to. And in particular, the methods that Guido developed to infer cause and effect from natural experiments have been adopted by thousands of researchers across the social sciences, and they have percolated into policy debates and business decision-making, as well as academic research. And so, I'm just especially proud that this award recognizes the deep commitment that Stanford has made to excellence in the social sciences and our belief that fundamental social science research can be both motivated and informed by and shape practice, that is policy and business decision-making. And that two-way interaction is really at the heart, certainly of the business school and of Stanford's vision of the future of social science research. So congratulations again to Guido, and what a remarkable day this is for the business school, for the university, and of course for Professor Imbens.
Thank you, John. I'd now like to turn it over to Dean Deborah Satz. Deborah, if you'd like to make some comments.
Sure. So first I want to add my congratulations to Guido for this amazing recognition of your scholarship. I want to just, as an outsider to the field, just put this in perspective. Social scientists can't do the kinds of controlled experiments that you can do in medicine, where you do a double-blind study, you can vary only one condition in a person and then test something. We can't do that in the real world, in the sense that we don't want to create a famine and then test it against a non-famine. So we have to look for other methods. And what Guido and his collaborators have recognized is that randomness in the world and in policy provides a kind of analog to the medical model, where we can look at variation, like one state has one regulation about labor and another state doesn't, and we can look at and then develop sophisticated models for helping us parse out the results from this randomness to generate knowledge. And the model that Guido and his collaborator have developed, as John Levin said, really sparked a revolution in the way that the social sciences conduct research now. And it's super exciting. I want to also add, from the perspective of the School of Humanities and Sciences, Guido is an amazing teacher, an active participant in seminars, a wonderful mentor, modest, and just delightful colleague. And he embodies something I think at Stanford we really are proud of, which is the ways that fundamental research can take off like a rocket ship and transform our thinking and our practices in ways that really make a difference to the world. This is the second Nobel Prize that the Department of Econ and the Business School have had in the last 2 years. And it's just a great reminder to all of us about the amazing excellence of our faculty colleagues. So congratulations, super exciting day. And we're all just so proud.
Thanks so much, Deborah. And now I'd like to invite our Nobel laureate, Professor Imbens. It would be great to have you make some remarks. Congratulations on your prize and on such a wonderful morning. And I'll turn it over to you to make some comments, and then we'll go into Q&A.
Thank you for the very kind words. It's obviously been a very exciting, somewhat disorienting morning. So first of all, let me say that Stanford, I've been here at Stanford since 2012, and this has just been an incredibly hospitable environment for the type of research I'm doing. I've always greatly benefited from having colleagues would do different types of things from the work I do as a way of finding inspiration for the work I do. And both the business school and the economics department have been great in that respect, where there's just a lot of wonderful colleagues whom are great to talk to and help me do better research. It had already been a very exciting week here. My wife got voted president-elect of the American Economic Association last week. So it was already quite an exciting week here in the household. And now this morning, hearing about the prize when the kids were all still around. My oldest son is senior in high school, so he's going to be leaving for college next year. It was just really nice to be able to celebrate this with my children and my wife. I also want to thank a couple of other people. One of my mentors at Harvard University, where I was on the faculty for a long time, Gary Chamberlain, actually passed away last year at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. We started I started an online seminar named after him, and he was always incredibly supportive of the work I was doing, even at a time when that wasn't quite as popular as it has become since then. The other thing I want to say is about my co-winners of this prize. Both of them I've known for a long time, and both of them are very close friends. Josh Angrist and I were assistant professors together at Harvard in the early 90s. And we hit it off right away. We'd go to seminars together, we would talk over coffee and at lunch. And in fact, we were both living in university housing at that time, which didn't have the laundry facilities in the apartment. So we would have to, Saturday mornings, go do our laundry in the university laundromat. And we would spend 3-4 hours there kind of talking about research, talking about papers we'd read. And essentially there, we laid the basis for the work that was now being rewarded over many Saturday mornings. Later, Josh was actually the best man at our wedding, and so he's been a very close personal friend as well as professional colleague. And so I couldn't be more thrilled to share the prize with him. And similarly with David Card, who was my colleague at Berkeley for 5 years. I've learned an enormous amount from talking to him, kind of seeing how he does his research, what kind of questions he works on. And although I kind of typically work on more theoretical, methodological topics than either Josh or David Card, their work has always been a great source of inspiration. And I could try to convey to my students that the way to do good methodological research is really talk to people doing empirical work and talk to people who are doing policy relevant things. So you can make sure that the methodological work you're doing is actually going to be used and relevant for people analyzing data. And from that perspective, David Card as well as Josh Angrist have been great role models there. Together with another person who's unfortunately no longer with us, Alan Kruger, who's the only person in the world who's actually co-authored papers with David Card, with Josh Angrist, and myself. And he passed away a couple of years ago, very untimely. We all greatly miss him and wish he could have been here to share this with us. Now, the particular work I got to share the prize for with Josh Angrist is about how to draw causal inferences from observational data. Like Deborah was saying, in economics, we typically don't have the luxury of doing randomized experiments of the type the Food and Drug Administration monitors routinely for new drugs. Sometimes we can do experiments, and the Nobel Prize that Banerjee, Duflo, and Kramer got 2 years ago was for showing how that in many cases it is actually possible to do randomized experiments. But it's still clear that in many other cases, you can't do that for ethical reasons, for financial reasons. And so we have to make do with observational data. And this is where a lot of the methodological work I've been involved in comes in. We try to tease apart the correlations we see in the data from the actual causal effects that are relevant for policymakers. And so as one example, for policymakers, it's of great interest to know what the effect would be of having a guaranteed income, having a basic income not tied to work requirements. And the concern, of course, is that if people have a guaranteed income, they might be less incentivized to actually look for work, to find the paid work. And so doing an experiment there would be very difficult. It would be incredibly expensive, and it might take a very long time. And so in one research project I did with Donald Rubin and Bruce Sesseroth, we surveyed the people who'd played the lottery in Massachusetts. And so there we included in that survey about 500 people who won the lottery. And so if you won the lottery in Massachusetts at that time, you wouldn't get, so suppose you won $500,000, you wouldn't get a check for 500,000. You would every year get a check for 25,000 and get that check every year for 20 years. And so that is actually much more similar to what you would think a guaranteed income would look like. And so we could compare, we surveyed people who'd won a long time before. We could compare the outcomes, the outcomes, the labor supply, the hours worked and earnings for the people who won the lottery and the people who didn't. And we could infer from that the causal effect of having this guaranteed income. And so what we found there is that there was clearly some effect on labor supply. It did make some difference for these people to get a guaranteed income, but it didn't change how much they worked all that much. And so without actually having done an experiment there, we could still learn a lot about what the causal effects of labor supply are in that case. Vanessa, should I?
No, that's great. I am happy to jump into some questions. We're getting them lined up, and I think people would love to hear more about your some of the practical applications of your work in a minute. But I think a lot of people are first asking just how you felt this morning getting that early morning call. So I have one question that says, did you think it was legitimate?
Well, I missed the first call that came in, and then the second call did wake me up, and I saw on my cell phone that it was coming from Sweden. So then I did get a little worried. So, well, but if this is not legitimate, that is a very elaborate prank. So let me at least answer it. And then there was somebody on the phone with a Swedish sounding accent. So at that point, it did seem like a very legitimate call. And so I realized that this might be a big deal.
How did you feel?
I was just shocked. I was just shocked. I mean, typically, the people winning these prizes have been much further along in their career. People often get this very late. And so I was kind of, I certainly did not expect this to come anytime soon. I said in the end, it was particularly gratifying to be able to get this while my kids here are still at home and be able to celebrate it with them. But it just came as a big shock.
Oh. Yeah, I can imagine. And I was mentioning to you earlier, we saw some of the photos from your home this morning with your family, and they were lovely to see. So thank you.
Yes, everybody was very excited.
Yeah, it's nice to see everyone being able to celebrate together. Another question we've had is, how does this research translate into your classroom? Do your business school students get practical lessons in applying this model to the big economic questions in the real world?
Yes, I mean, the business school in particular, kind of a lot of the students are interested in going to some of the tech companies where they're very interested in this type of work. They're doing both experiments as well as analyzing the observational data they have but they're almost always interested in causal effects. So a lot of these things are just very directly relevant for what they'll see in businesses they might end up working for.
Interesting. You were talking earlier about that one example of the lottery, which was fascinating. In your research, what are some of the findings that have been least intuitive to you at the time? Is there any examples you can give us where what the research has shown in the real world is not what one might have guessed it might be?
Oh, so yeah, so I think with the lottery, it was somewhat surprising that there wasn't a bigger effect there. That people worry a lot about these incentive effects of having a basic income, and that may not be quite as big a deal. Not a surprising thing there was that we also just asked directly about how happy people felt. And this was about 6-7 years after they won the lottery. And it didn't actually seem to be that much of a difference between the people who had won the lottery and the people who didn't win the lottery. So it didn't seem to have that big an effect on their overall happiness.
Professor Imbens, what was the initial problem you wanted to solve? How did you get into this research, and how did it expand over time for you?
Well, so initially, a lot of this came out of conversations with Josh Angrist. He'd written his thesis at Princeton on estimating the effect of serving in the military on the earnings later in life. And so you can imagine, you could just simply compare people who serve in the military with people who didn't, but that's not really very credible, because especially say if you look at data from people who served during World War II, the people who served in the military were much better educated, were much healthier than the people who didn't. So there's lots of reasons why their earnings might be different. And Josh had come up with this very, very clever idea of using data from the Vietnam War, whether people served or not was partly determined by the draft lottery. And so there was this piece of randomness injected into the process. And he exploited that to estimate the effect of serving on the military on earnings. And that seemed incredibly convincing, but it didn't agree with a lot of the formal econometric theory that said that you couldn't really get the average effect of serving in the military in that case. It would suggest you would need very strong, really not believable assumptions say that the effect was actually the same for everybody. And that just seemed very implausible. And so Josh and I kind of spent a lot of time going back and forth and trying to figure out why, on the one hand, we believed the results were very convincing, but why the theory suggested they shouldn't really be that credible. And it turned out by framing the question a little different, we could get not the average effect for everybody, but the average effect for some subpopulation of people who were affected by the draft lottery to actually serve in the military. And I kind of see that was a subtle difference, but it helped explain and interpret a lot of different results. In other work that Angrist and Kruger did, they looked at the effect of education on earnings. And there they use as an instrument the variation in compulsory schooling laws. And the way compulsory schooling laws work is that if you're born on September 30th, you have to start school much earlier than if you're born on, say, October 1st. And exploiting that variation turned out in this framework that we developed to give you the effect of additional education for those people who are kind of on the margin, who are almost dropping out of school, but now are forced to stay in school a little longer. And so that's kind of a very special group, but also a very interesting group, because it's people who are actually on the lower end of educational achievement. And it turned out that even for that group, the returns to education were very high. And so that would suggest we should really encourage those people to stay in school longer. And so that's a very policy relevant group for in many of the education debates.
Oh, that's very interesting. You obviously, there's the whole basis of your work is around real world applications. How do you see your research really underpinning applied economics?
Well, so what I tried to do is listen to people doing empirical work, kind of people like Josh, like David, like Raj Chetty when he was my colleague here. I kind of try to see what kind of what places I think the methodologies are still lacking and not quite as convincing as they could be. And so I really like to talk to the people doing that type of applied economics and kind of find ways of improving the methodologies there, so that the things I'm working on will actually get used in practice.
And I think on that point, a question, can you give us some examples of how your work has been used by governments? You mentioned the fact that the work that you do, it's really determined, it really is made to be used by policymakers. Are there any examples you have of where this type of research has been used to inform policy?
Yeah, so no, in the end, most of the way it's used is sort of slightly indirectly, where the methods I develop get used by empirical researchers, by a lot of empirical researchers, and then those applications are used in particular policy debates. In my own empirical work, I've actually looked also at the cost of military service, where I looked at data from the Netherlands, and there was some variation in the way compulsory military service was implemented. That meant that particular people were otherwise comparable, were much more likely to serve in the military than another group. And what that showed was that there was implicitly, so the people who served in the military had lower earnings later. It was as if implicitly they were being made to pay a tax that other people were not, going to the very heart of the fairness of that system, and thinking about how we should actually make that burden more fairly distributed over the population.
Great, thank you. I'd like to remind the media that they're welcome to submit any questions that we would be happy to present to Professor Imbens. Professor, you mentioned earlier about your wife and the fact that this has been a big weekend in your household, which is really great news. Do you do any collaborations with her?
We do. We have written a number of papers together. The first one, I think, was published in 2006 or so. And so we both do a lot of collaborative. We've done a fair amount of collaborative work, as well as discuss each other's work, kind of both with the kids and with each other. We're interested in very similar questions, and so this leads to very heated debates at the dinner or breakfast table. And so I hope they now get the message that they need to listen to me a bit more. But I'm worried that that's not really going to work out that way.
I can imagine that those debates are a lot of fun to listen to. I'm going to ask you one last question, unless we get any further questions from the media online. What does the rest of your day look like? You got up very early this morning, obviously.
I got up very, very early, yeah. So it's been a long day already. I do have a seminar with my students early in the afternoon, so I hope to still be able to do that. You know, a big part of what makes my job so much fun is working with young people, and just the students here are terrific. And in the years that I've been here, more and more students have gotten interested in this type of research. And so the ability to actually interact with them regularly and kind of see them grow as scholars is just incredibly rewarding, and it just makes working at a university such an incredible privilege. So I hope to be able to still do that today. And then I think there's a couple of other things scheduled, but I've lost track of my schedule a little bit.
So I think that's fairly common for Nobel laureates on the day they're announced. So
Yes.
I'm sure you'll have many opportunities to celebrate. It's great that you get to do that with the students, and I'm sure many of your colleagues will want to do that with you the rest of the day. And hopefully later on today, you can at least get some rest. We're so thrilled for you. We want to thank you for joining us and congratulate you again on your incredible accomplishments and on this well-deserved recognition. I would like to thank all of our speakers who joined us today and all of you who called in from all over the world for the press conference. And on behalf of everyone at Stanford, we thank you for joining us on this very happy occasion.
Thanks, Farnaz.